This is Lorenzo, and this is the Training Space Taxonomy video series, lesson number 12. It's on our 8th equipment space, our open floor parallettes, allowing us to do 6 exercises with less wrist extension strain, increased elevation, as well as increased range of motion. Let's take a look. Starting to the left of our matrix, the equipment in question is the parallettes. This is what they look like. We will be using them on the floor in our open floor zone. The parallettes is the third of 3 floor stored based equipment items, along with our parallel bars and our box. And it's going to allow us to do at least 6 of the 50 plus gymnastics exercises. So before we take a look at the specifications of what makes a good pair of parallettes, we first need to know what exercises we plan on doing with them. So let's take a look at some of them now. For our first exercise, we have the tuck planche. The purpose of the parallettes here is twofold: to give us some elevation, but also to put our wrist in a neutral position, taking some of the strain off of our wrist, as we can see here. For our second exercise, we have the scap shrugs. We can see that the parallettes provides me with just enough elevation for me to do a full shrug. For our third exercise, we have the L-sit. The parallettes provides us with elevated support. The L-sit on the ground is a more advanced progression for the L-sit because we would typically do the L-sits on the parallel bars. For our fourth and final example, we have the chest hover, or this could also be a push-up. And I use an example of blocks in this scenario just to show you that you can also use blocks instead of parallettes for giving you similar elevation. But of course, it's still putting our wrist in an extended position. But the function of this exercise is to give us about 2 to 3 inches of increased range of motion, so greater depth in the push-up. Now we can classify all of our parallette exercises in at least 3 categories. For our first category, we have the parallettes primary use case, which for me is in the planche and all of its progressions, simply because it's the one exercise where we place the most strain on our wrist. So it really serves to reduce that wrist extension strain by putting our wrists in a neutral grip. In our second category, our parallettes serve as the perfect substitute for parallel bar exercises such as the scap shrug, and as an advanced progression for the L-sit. As for our third and final category, our parallettes serve as the perfect substitute for floor and wall based exercises such as the press handstand, handstand push-ups, and the push-up itself, as we saw here. Moving on to the specifications guide, we saw that the main goal for our parallettes was, number 1, to reduce the wrist extension strain that we can experience with many floor-based exercises by giving us press and elevated support, as we saw here, and even elevation for allowing us to increase our range of motion, such as with the push-up. As for our specifications, now there are many types of parallettes that we can buy: low, high, wooden ones, steel ones. It doesn't really matter, but there are some minimum requirements that you want to look for to make sure that your parallettes are sturdy and safe. For example, the ones that you see on the left, the material that I prefer, just from personal experience, is wood. And just make sure that your parallettes have anti-slip silicone padding. And as for dimensions, you want to make sure that the length of your parallettes can fit your hand. So minimum 20 centimeters. In terms of its width, you want something that has a base of support that's at least 14 centimeters, I have found. And then finally, the height, because these are relatively low, you don't want to go lower than 10 centimeters. Finally, in terms of weight, the reason I like the low and short parallettes so much is because they're so light compared to their taller and longer counterparts, and has a maximum capacity of over 1 ton. As for our equipment guide, in other words, where do we use it? What can we pair with it? And where do we store it? It's very simple. We will use our parallettes in an open floor zone, as we saw here. We can use it on top of or with a mat. And finally, where do we store it? As you can see, I store mine in my open floor zone with my box and parallel bars. And because I opted for the low and short and very light parallettes, it makes it very mobile and travel friendly. So in summary, our parallettes serve as the perfect neutral grip, elevated, primary, and substitutional support for at least 6 exercises.